Shalom. This week we are in Parasha Ki-Tisei. That means when you go out. Numbers 21 to Numbers 25. Now what they reckon this Parasha is all about, they say it's the war Parasha. Because it starts with the topic of war in Numbers 21 and it ends with the topic of war in Numbers 25. And it's all about the inheritance that Yahweh will give us, or give his people, as an outcome of this war. Now Ki-Tisei, as the gematria of 438, that means Yahweh or Elohim destroys. And that is basically in context of the first verse of this parasha. It says, when you go out, when Yahweh or Elohim hand over your enemies, and then you can take beautiful women from the enemy's camp and marry them. Now that's a very odd statement if you think about it. I thought Israel weren't allowed to marry any of the other nations, but this is more of a prophetic context. Now when we step back into the previous Torah portions, it's all about crossing the Jordan. It's all about instructions given to Moses, and then Moses giving it to the people prior to them crossing the Jordan and entering the promised land. Now what we see from that prophetically, or first of all what happened historically, is the Jordan was the border which they crossed, and the Jordan River opened up and they walked through on dry land. Those are with the covenant. And then they entered the land, and there were enemies, there were giants that they had to defeat to take possession of the land, to take possession of the inheritance. And in the context of this verse, part of the inheritance are the nations. Now that's the prophetic picture of what it is all about. The nations aren't supposed to be destroyed. They are supposed to be converted. They are supposed to see the awesomeness of our God and then grab you by your tzitzi and say, teach me about your Elohim. So that's the intent of this war. That's the intent of Yahweh, defeating the enemy on behalf of Israel. But they have to do something. Now in this Torah portion, we're going to discover what they are supposed to do. And we find the answer in the book of Daniel chapter 10. Now before I go in there, I just want to elaborate a bit more about when you go out and do war and taking the beautiful woman from the nations. Now when he says about that, it said you can marry her. Now marriage is a covenant relationship. Covenant relationship, of course, if you look at it from the context of Yahweh's perspective, it's a wedding. It's a covenant relationship and a marriage between the nations and the Messiah. And the nations can become part of the bride. And that's the idea of taking beautiful women from the battlefield. Now, why beauty? Beauty. Why is that important? Why not ugly women? Why beautiful women? Now, beautiful or beauty is connected to the word shofar. That means to beautify. And those who adhere to the shofar, those who basically started to join Israel, they are becoming beautiful. And you can take them in as part of the covenant. But then those beautiful women who started the process of coming in, those nations who start to becoming part of Yahweh's household, they need to do three things. They need to shave their hair, they need to cut their nails, and they need to take off and replace their clothing that they wore. Now that in general is a meaning of letting loose of or letting go of your culture, your previous culture, and then putting on new garments, your hair growing out again, and beautifying yourself with Yahweh's things is taking on the Hebrew culture, becoming Ivri. And they had a month to mourn their previous family, to mourn their previous culture, the things they came out from, and then they become the wife of the one of the house, which he took her into the house. If she decided after a month she doesn't want to be part of the household, then she could leave. And you're not supposed to sell her as a slave. She's a free woman. And that is basically to let her go, and Yahweh will deal with her later in the next cycle. So this is basically a message specifically for the time frame of the war. Now, previously we had a few different terms from the Great Tribulation. We call it the birth, we call it the harvest, and now it's called the war. And the battle is basically where the conflict happens. Now, the conflict in religious, or not religious, in biblical terms, is basically to do with the enemy, who is called the opposer. And making war with the enemy is opposing the enemy and the enemy opposing you. It's like tug of war. It's like pushing and pulling. And the one who pushed you over the other one over the borderline, that one now possesses the land. And it's the force of pushing out the enemies and allowing Yahweh's people into the land, and the people within the land to become part of that or be pushed out. So that's what the concept of the war is about. It's about oppression or pushing or opposing. The reason I'm saying that is because the same language is used in Daniel 10, where it talks about Daniel, who prayed and fasted for, he only ate certain things for 21 days. And then the messenger appeared. After 21 days, the messenger said, I was opposed by the prince of Persia. And he overcame, and then he could come and see Daniel and reveal more vision to Daniel. Now, within the context of that, we see that there's a prince of Persia in the spiritual, and there was also a prince of Persia or a king of Persia in the physical. So every physical nation or kingdom has a spiritual replica behind it. And the real battle happens in the spiritual, where the commander, the one that came down as a messenger, with the commander, his commander Michael, opposed the prince of Persia. And it took him 21 days to overcome. Now, within the Gematria of 21, it's a beautiful picture of prayer and the outcome of prayer. I'm not going to go into the detail of the meanings, but part of the meanings is to whisper, to murmur, is to bring your petition, and then it's also the servants of Yahweh who's doing that. And then there's the great burst and force that will push out, and there's the word woe in there, that will overcome, and then there's inheritance and possession after that. So the number 21 depicts our part we play in the battle, in the war. We need to intercede, we need to make petition during this time of our oppression, and then Yahweh, or the great commander with his armies, his angels, will make war against those spiritual entities in the spiritual, and that will manifest in the physical, where we will see the victory. So I'm just going to leave you with that beautiful parasha in context with our current situation prophetically and within our physical, historical time frame. So I hope that blessed you, and I will speak to you soon. Shalom.